Russia and the United States failed to reach a compromise on a possible peace deal to end the war in Ukraine after a 5-hour Kremlin meeting. President Vladimir Putin met with US President Donald Trump's top envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in talks that extended past midnight. The discussions focused heavily on what the Kremlin calls the territorial problem, essentially Russia's claims over Ukraine's Donbas region. Currently, Russia controls roughly 88% of Donbas and 73% of Zaporozhye and Kherson, according to US estimates. The Donbas region, which includes Donetsk and Luhansk, sits at the heart of any potential peace deal. Its strategic, political, and symbolic significance makes it one of the most contested areas of the war.
Strategically, it is important for Russia because, one, it could mean expanding Russia's territory westward and taking Ukraine's territory by taking Donbas, using again this narrative of these ethnic Russians or the Russian speakers to sort of justify the invasion, which has been what we've seen for the last at least 3.5 years. In addition to this, though, beyond Donbas, Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Zaporizhzhia become very important for Russia strategically because it gives them greater access to the Black Sea. As you move westwards in that way, and then even into Odessa, that would essentially cut off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. So Crimea has already been occupied and annexed for the last several years, as we know. But in addition, taking the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson would allow Russia to essentially, I guess, strangle Ukraine, if you would. Arguably, we would say that actually Russia wants to take all of Ukraine, not just Donetsk. Russia has really showed no indication that it wants to stop this war once it acquires Donetsk and Luhansk. If this were the case, it wouldn't have launched the 2022 invasion. Really, as in the last 10 years, or especially since 2013-14, as we've seen increasing increasing westward integration in Ukraine, and that is only, I guess, fired up, if you will, Russia's desire to keep Ukraine within its control. Donetsk and Luhansk are easier regions to keep it in its control because it has occupied these places since 2014. So it has been able to control them. It has put in, puppet governments. It has put in their own people there. It has built it in its own way. It is in many ways indoctrinating children, etc. Right? You see this. It's able to control these regions in a way that it would never be able to should it now take new territories. There is the economic element to it in that the resources there, although the reality is these resources likely will not be able to be accessed for arguably a decade at least because of the mines that are in these regions, the fact that these lands have been completely destroyed, these cities completely flattened. I was speaking with a soldier earlier today who just said, there's nothing left. It's just piles of stones left in some of these cities, like Soledar, Mariupol, Bakhmut. There's nothing there anymore because it's just simply stones. Again, there is, I think, the fear, and I think there's a lot of truth to the argument that should these regions be taken by force, Donetsk and Luhansk or Donbas more largely, that this will only set the stage for further and additional invasions by Russia. And I think this is really important for the world to understand, is that when you validate or legitimize force being used to change the borders of a state in the 21st century, this only then legitimizes further changing of borders by force in the 21st century. And I think this is not a rabbit hole that we really want to go down. But I think the important question to ask, and I think is one Ukrainians are asking themselves right now, is what is the value of life as well? And what do you fight for? And I don't know at this point. The trouble is that we don't have a clear answer in that, should you stop fighting, what guarantee is that there will be no more bloodshed? And until there is a firm answer for Ukrainians and they're not going to stop fighting, they won't be able, afford or not. It's just the principle and the fact that people have ties to these land. Their ancestors were buried there. For 30 plus years, this is Ukrainian land. So therefore, are all those lives lost in vain to just give up land? I think most important is to think about 2014, beginning with the Euromaidan revolution. Of course, we saw, from Ukraine's independence, stirrings and real strong sentiments about wanting to be part of the European Union and move towards westward integration. We saw this again in 2004 with the Orange Revolution. But even more importantly, we saw this in 2013 and 14, where Ukrainians repeatedly showed that they were willing to die, and many did, on in Kyiv on Maidan, showing that they are committed to their country following a European integration route rather than staying under sort of the control of the Russian government, whatever form that is. And so I think that really was a breaking point and really where these sentiments started to stir, especially where the Russian government didn't want to let go Ukraine. I mean, strategically, of course, because it serves in its eyes as a buffer zone before the West, but even more in a resource sense, right? Economically. Being under Russia's domain is good for Russia, definitely not what Ukrainians want, and definitely not good for Ukraine. But in Russia's eyes, letting go of Ukraine would essentially mean that it no longer is an empire that it once was. And I think that's a very hard fact for any losing empire to accept. I think Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and then Mykolaiv towards Odessa would really be what Russia would want, is fundamentally closing Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. And so this would be an argument for why it's happy to just pause the border or the fighting now in order to acquire troops to continue. No, I think what's really important, what I've sort of said though, is just underscoring Ukrainians' voice in this. And I think last week was a real disappointment for many Ukrainians in the fact that their voices were not brought into the conversations. And of course, we don't know what went down in Alaska on Friday. And hopefully today, the conversation will be much more seriously involved with Ukrainians' views. In this case, the army is very much a civilian army. These are volunteers who have risked their lives, who were not previously military. And so with this is that civil society plays a really important role here. They're the ones in many ways funding the war effort, with their own volunteer efforts, with their own capacities. And so giving up lands would really call to question many things, but really importantly, were all those lives lost in vain? What comes with the losing of the lands, or what comes next? Is there some sort of guarantee by NATO that Ukraine will be a member state? Is there a guarantee that NATO will patrol their skies and their borders for the next 100,000 years, right? And what comes with it? And I think that unless there is some sort of consolidation that Ukrainians see, this point, I have not seen a proposal by any Western country that would legitimate that. So therefore, I think that if today President Zelenskyy were to give up those lands, I think there would be considerable upheaval, definitely. But again, this would need to come with some sort of security guarantees, because Ukrainians won't stop fighting. Even if the government is mandating their troops out of there are many volunteer battalions who will continue to go back in there and fight. So I think there has to be some sort of security guarantees backing it.
Putin's top foreign policy aide Yuri Yushakov said compromises were not reached. While some US draft proposals were more or less acceptable, others were deemed unsuitable by Russia. Witkoff later briefed the White House in Moscow. Leaked US proposals last month alarmed Ukrainian European powers, who then proposed a counter framework. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy stressed the need for fair and transparent negotiations, warning against games behind Ukraine's back.
Зараз один з найважчих моментів нашої історії. Зараз тиск на Україну один з найважчих. Зараз Україна може опинитися перед дуже складним вибором. Або втрата гідності, або ризик втрати ключового партнера. Або складні 28 пунктів, або вкрай важка зима. Найважча та подальші ризики. Національний український інтерес має бути врахований. Ми не робимо гучних заяв, ми будемо спокійно працювати з Америкою та усіма партнерами. Буде конструктивний пошук рішень з нашим головним партнером. Я буду наводити аргументи, я буду переконувати, пропонувати альтернативи, але точно ми не дамо ворогу приводів сказати, що це Україна не хоче миру, що це вона зриває процес і це Україна не готова до дипломатії. Але і Європа, і весь світ мають розуміти і іншу правду, що українці перш за все люди. І ми майже 4 роки повномасштабного вторгнення стримуємо одну з найбільших армій світу. І ми тримаємо лінію фронту у кілька тисяч кілометрів. І наш народ щоночі переживає обстріли, ракетні атаки, удари балістики, удари шахедів. І наші люди щодня втрачають когось із своїх близьких. І наші люди дуже хочуть, аби ця війна закінчилась. Ми, звісно, сталеві, але будь-який, навіть найміцніший метал може не витримати. І зараз Єдність також потрібна нам, як ніколи, аби у нашому домі був достойний мир. Я звертаюся зараз до всіх українців. Наші люди, громадяни, політики, всі. Треба зібратись, прийти в себе, припинити срач, припинити політичні ігрища. Держава має працювати, парламент воюючої країни має працювати об'єднано, уряд воюючої країни має працювати ефективно. І всі ми разом маємо не забувати і не плутати, хто саме є сьогодні ворогом України. Я не зрадив Україну тоді, я точно відчував за своїми плечима підтримку кожного з вас, кожного українця, українки, кожного солдата, кожного волонтера, кожного медика, дипломата, журналіста, всього нашого народу. Ми не зрадили Україну тоді, ми не зробимо цього зараз. І я точно знаю, що у цей справді один з найважчих моментів нашої історії я не один. Наступний тиждень буде дуже непростим, насиченим на події. Ви дорослий, розумний, свідомий народ, який не раз це доводив, і який розуміє, що в цей час буде багато тиску політичного, інформаційного, різного, щоб послабити нас, щоб розсварити нас. Ворог не спить і робитиме все, аби у нас нічого не вийшло.
Before the talks, Putin insisted Russia does not seek war with Europe but warned of severe consequences if Europe initiated one.